15 of the Sesh, powered by Cornfed Coaching FC. Game models and tactical periodizations are important steps to establish your club's or team's identity on the field. Lockdowns have given us all time to think about working on our own, and there's been no shortage of webinars out there to help you through the process. This past week, the Nebraska State Soccer Association had a virtual symposium, and game model development was a highlight of the week. Here on this Friday morning, to get us going, is the Director of Coaching from the Nebraska State Soccer Association, Jeremy Tosaya. Jeremy, welcome to the Sesh.
Yeah, thanks, Damien.
Cool. And then special guest on the panel today is Gary Eyles. Gary is the Executive Director for the Ames Soccer Club. Gary, welcome to the panel.
Thanks. It's nice to be on the other side of this.
Yeah, Gary is the lost episode of the Sesh, episode number 2, of which we have video of and no sound. So it was never.
We had that happen during our symposium. So.
Yeah. So actually, it was a really good episode. I was totally excited about it after we did it and didn't have sound. So one of these days we'll have to recreate that whole situation. So Jeremy, how's the symposium been going for you guys this week? I know you're just wrapping up. Have you been getting a lot of good feedback from people and people excited about the content?
Yeah, I mean, every day after the presenters go, I get text messages from coaches in the state, even outside the state, that have said they've been so excited about what they've been seeing and hearing. And yesterday I got a text message from a coach in Texas that actually attended an advanced national that Rob Herringer was an instructor for. And he just texted me and said, "Hey, thanks so much for reconnecting me with Rob. Really, he loved him as an instructor and was so happy to see him on the presentation." So yeah, I've been, obviously probably because of it being free, right? We've had some really diverse group of coaches involved. So yeah, it was really cool. It's been really cool so far.
Yeah, no, I jumped on the first day and watched the first 2, and then the week got away from me, but definitely planning on getting on. I know Gary was on day 1 as well. Have you been able to catch any more of them, Gary, since then?
Yeah, I've caught a couple of them, and especially the word free. That was very appealing to me, where you can get free education. So thanks for making that. And I think Ian actually guilted Iowa Soccer. He was promoting their symposium and said that it was free also, which it obviously isn't. So
we'll get in. It's not free. The Iowa Soccer Symposium does begin tonight, though. Obviously, we're sponsoring that event, so that should be a good one as well. But so going in, one of the things that in your presentation, and you could share your screen whenever you want, but I really liked your definition. If you want to maybe jump to that on the slide deck of what you had as being a game model. And I don't remember if that was something that you would come up with or one of your shared experiences.
Nothing I said in that presentation was mine. I stole everything that was in that presentation. So let's see. So there it is. That's the definition there. Just creating a sense of order within your team while causing disorganization component.
Yeah. So I noted that. I really liked that as a really simple way to kind of just define that. And then also you're on the, I don't see it on that screen, but there was something on one of the slides you had that was talking about what it's not. And I think it's important that it's not about systems. It's about how you would play within the system.
Yeah, it'd be that right there.
Okay. Yeah. So that's awesome stuff. If we jump, so what we'll say is, we'll link up this presentation. It's about a 30-minute presentation. So anyone watching this, if you want to do it in whatever order, is watch this sesh, go back and watch the presentation on actually the game model development, the tactical periodization development. We want to dive more into the actual training session and ask some questions about that. So if you want to jump to your training session, which I think is building out of the back.
Yep.
Okay. So the show is yours. You can go through it starting from your warm-up or from your 4th activity or 3rd activity, as obviously you said that you work backwards within your development of your session. So we'll just kind of leave you to describe what you describe, and then we'll ask questions as they come up.
Yeah. Well, so I think actually kind of like that idea, like you said, working backwards. I'll just kind of start from here. So this idea of roadmap, it's been something that, like I said in my presentation, it first dawned on me, this idea of roadmaps, when I was at a national instructors workshop for U.S. soccer, right? So, and this is the first time that I was thinking about soccer in the form of roadmap, right? And at first it was a very confusing idea to me, but I really, really liked it. And as I've kind of gotten more into the hang of using this personally and with my team, now trying to communicate that with with either the clubs that I'm directors for, or now, you know, as a state director, trying to communicate this idea that, hey, let's have this game model laid out in a roadmap so we can communicate, talk on the same level, right? And so same thing with the teams that I coach. Hey, here's how we look at the game of soccer as a team, right? And start getting some consistency. And so kind of like you mentioned, Damo, I like to work from what's the finished product look like, and then backwards, even in my training sessions, right? So I think it's important to have this game model idea first established in our mind, and then working backwards into setting up our training sessions, right? So this idea of tactical periodization is that your training sessions revolve around the tactical game plan that you're trying to establish as a team, your game model, right? Essentially, how you're trying to organize your team for the game model, and with your philosophy. So specifically in this roadmap, just like U.S. Soccer's roadmap, broken down into the 3/3 of the field. What's the goal in each of those thirds? For me, and I mentioned this in my presentation, the principles of play were huge in my education as a coach, initially as a college coach, and definitely working in the youth game. And so for me, these principles of play are indisputable. I don't mess with them, right? They're in every single model for whatever type of system or philosophy I have. It's trying to address these principles of play, right? So from the defensive side, where do we apply pressure? How do we apply pressure? Where's my cover come from? What's the balance look like? And what players are responsible for balance? How do we keep the field compact? And then what does our control and restraint look like? So my style or my game model addresses those principles of play defensively, and then also the attacking principles of play are addressed in the attacking style. And so if we go from there and then look at, okay.
Jeremy, could I ask a question? I liked in your presentation, if you go back to the previous slide, and I think in your presentation, you talked about non-negotiables on this slide.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think, you know, we were as a club looking at our game model and we talked about what are non-negotiables. So I think you said that the where, the goal, and the principles of play, that those were your non-negotiables, and then the tactical philosophy and the key components of the players, that those were flexible. Is that correct? Yeah. So I really like that.
For me, and I think for me, it's just, again, so my philosophy revolves around the objective of the soccer game is to put the ball in the back of the net, right? Scoring goals. So again, I think first you have to decide what is the objective of the soccer game for you, right? And so for me, it's to score goals. And so everything in our philosophy revolves around how do we score goals, right? So if you look at the attacking roadmap, how do you score goals? If the objective is scoring goals, then what is my objective if I'm in the build-up zone, defensive third? What's my objective to score goals if I'm in the consolidation zone, middle third? What's my objective of scoring goals when I'm in the attacking third, right? Zone 14, goal area. So to me, you can't mess with those, right? If the objective of the game is to score goals, then the objective of having the ball in the defensive third is to get to the attacking third so you can score goals, right? And for me, the principles of play, like I said, they've been so huge in my education as a coach. The principles of play are non-negotiables now, right? So like we just can't mess with those. You have to find penetration to score goals. You have to find width to open up gaps, get penetration to score goals, right? You have to have depth if there's no options to go forward so that you can keep the ball to score goals later, right? You have to have mobility to unbalance the offense. And so how you achieve those things, how you get penetration, how you get width, where you find width, how you get depth and support, who is doing that, that comes into then your style, right? How you see the game being played. But every system, every style has to address those principles. And if the objective of the game is to score goals, then the objective of the defensive third, having the ball in the defensive third, has to be getting to the attacking third to score goals, right? And then same thing with the defensive. And so this was taught to me as well at a coaching course, actually. A coach just made a comment hey, if the objective of a game is to score goals, then defense isn't about keeping the other team from scoring goals. Defense is about getting the ball back so you can score goals, right? Because it still has to revolve around that objective of the game, which to me was a revelation. I'd never thought about defense that way. And actually, it changed my mindset about it, right? Because defense was, oh, yeah, we got to work on, because you can't let the other team score. Oh, I don't want to. But then I started doing this with my teams, right? And all of a sudden, defense became more interesting because, hey, it's about getting the ball back so we can score goals. It is still about scoring goals, right? So it's changing your mindset from on that defensive side. Now, again, I think there's other ways to look at defense, and so I'm not saying this is the only. Like I think Rob Herringer said it really good in our symposium yesterday. It's not the only way; it's a way, right, to look at the game and to look at defense. But to me, as a player and as a coach, I thought this really helped kind of communicate what are we trying to do on the defensive side of the ball. We're trying to win possession to get the ball back so we can score goals. But how you do that, when you do that, changes. Yeah, so, and I do apologize, I jumped on the wrong road on that, but yeah, so the idea was building up from the defensive third was the training session. So we're trying to identify these principles of play, so the penetration, width, depth, mobility, creativity. And then we start getting into the specifics of how I think the game should be played, which would be those tactical team philosophies, and then what are the key attributes my players need to have to fulfill that style. So again, sorry, so now just getting to the training session, but so yeah, it's having that idea of how you think the game should be played. So then now that's the fourth activity, right? It's the game. So if I see the game being played with shorter passes, staying in control of the ball, moving the ball side to side until you open up gaps to find penetrating passes to move the ball forward, that's my last activity, right? So I envision what I want to see it look like in the game, that last activity, so then now I build it backwards, right? So, okay, so now I'm going to use half the field. We're moving side to side, so I want to have multiple options to get into the attacking half, so that's why I have the 3 goals, plus I generally play a 4-3 or 1-4-3-3. So 3 forwards, 2 wings, and a target to play into would be those 3 gates, right? And so we're going to move the ball side to side until we see an opening to go forward. And when the ball goes sideways, we're going to drop in, give good support. Mids are going to come over, help us triangulate. Can we get forward with that movement, right? And then moving back from that, okay, so let's just move on our side-to-side movement. Let's work on our technical ability, opening our hips, the quality of passes, hard movement after we pass the ball. And can we find those center mids to triangulate with and get forward? And then very technical, just the ball movement, painting a picture of the pattern that we want, starting positions of the players in that warm-up activity.
Jeremy, is there, I would imagine, some real intentionality to your goals being angled, 2 goals on the right and left side? How does that pertain to the game model, and how could coaches perhaps adapt that if their game model is a little bit different during the build out?
Yeah, so for me, I just think about what do I want those passes to look like going forward, and it's triangulation, right? So for me, the way I like to see the game played is outside, inside, outside. So the diagonal wide gate is because we just went inside, and so now we're looking to go back outside from the central spaces. So that's going to look like a diagonal pass. And so my specific game philosophy and game model is we don't want square passes, we want diagonal passes, and that just kind of reemphasizes that diagonal movement, right? And that diagonal passes from my central players. That's all it is.
Okay, no, it's fine. It's just, yeah, trying to give that why in there. And then is there any situation where you would potentially move those goals a little bit closer?
Yeah, so if my system, right, so again, game model is not a system. Game model is a style. And so if I changed my system to like a 4-2-3-1, where my 3 are a little bit more tucked in, I would definitely move those gates in. This is specifically for a 1-4-3-3, right? And I like to play with wide wingers. And so if that's an option for us to go forward, then I want to try and have those gates wider to replicate the 3 forwards, that's 2 wingers being wide. If we did like a 4-2-3-1, then those definitely would be tucked in to replicate where my 3 central attacking mids would be, basically.
Cool. And then just one more question, and Gary, jump in whenever you want if you have questions. How much, looking then at your tactical periodization plans, do you get into, especially with this age group, so 14U girls, are you worried about work to rest ratios? Do you get into like recovery days or maintenance days, or are you just kind of like, I don't want to say whatever about it, but what's your environment like there, and how does that work?
No, it's huge. So case in point, just had training this past Tuesday, and I had a young lady. It was probably the first practice she's been to in about a month, but she was playing on 3 basketball teams, and now she's transitioned to the track now that basketball's over, right? And so the conversation with her has been, hey, if you're playing on 3 basketball teams and you've got 2 basketball practices on the Tuesdays before our training sessions, don't come to Tuesday training, right? Or if you're going to play 7 games in a weekend of basketball, don't come to our soccer scrimmage, right? So yeah, definitely take that into account as far as, how many days has it been since our, so when we were outside, we were generally playing on a Saturday or a Sunday, and our trainings were Tuesdays and Fridays. Is that right? I think so. Gosh, it wasn't that long ago. You'd think I'd remember. I think it was Mondays and Thursdays. We were training Mondays and Thursdays. So obviously, if we played on a Sunday, that Monday training is a recovery session, right? So it's very low impact. We do. I'm really big on yoga or partner stretch, PNF stretch. Kind of drawing on my background in exercise science. But yeah, so we would do recovery type stuff that day if we played on Sunday, training on Monday, because that's the assigned training day we had, right? And then Thursdays obviously would be a little bit higher intensity, try and get some more action going. But you can see like this training session, very low impact, because honestly, the ball's the thing that should be doing most of the movement, not the player. Right?
So Jeremy, I have some questions on the activation period. So, and I think it's, always interesting when you do these and you talk about evaluating, sessions, because I think you can pick apart different things and you can get quite picky.
Sure.
But so my question is, don't have the goalkeeper in the activation period. Was that intentional?
Yeah. So for me, it's intentional just from the standpoint of generally the way I would do this is I would have the back 5 players plus the attacking 5 players, and they would be working on pattern ball movement, right? And so that might be an opportunity for the goalkeepers, if we have 2 of them, to kind of get each other warmed up with hands, that type of stuff. And then putting the goalkeeper in where they actually need to drop off and provide support when the ball actually comes into play, right? So for me, it was just mainly in this pattern that I have with it's more of like a W. Stole this from Dave Brandt, who used to be the head coach at Messiah College, and then he was at Navy, then the Rochester Rhinos. I think he's at Hope College now, a D3 school. And so I stole this from him. It was actually at the 2007 convention is when I first saw this. Yeah, it's like a W pattern play. So it's diagonal passes between these 5 players. And so it's just to simplify it. So sometimes I will include the goalkeeper where they alternate between going to the 6 and then alternate go to the 1, right? So it'd be a pass to the wing cuts it back, drops it back to the center back, then tries to find the 6 or the 1, and then that player will find the other center back, the 4, and then pass it back out to the opposite wing, and then we just bring it back and go back through it again. So yeah, I think with the team that I'm coaching right now, we try to simplify as much as possible. It's a 3rd tier U14 girls team. We're in an ECNL club, so the top team is ECNL, the second team is region, and so we're the state league team. And so just trying to simplify it for them would be the primary thing with this group.
Okay. And then a follow-up question is, what are the other players doing while this activity is going on? Because I think that's sometimes is, you look at these lesson plans and it always used to be when the methodology in coaching was if you have 16 players, you work with those 16 players and they've got to be shown on your lesson plan all the way through. So what are the other
Right.
players doing while this is going on?
Right. So like I said, during the activation, I would have my attacking five doing something very similar. Right. So to me, in my philosophy, the passing is the same in the back half as it is in the front attacking half. So it's diagonal passes, pass to feet, passes on the ground, 2-touch or 3-touch with a Croy, passing both the attacking players and the defending players. So the attacking five are actually doing the same pattern. And sometimes if we've progressed well enough, then we'll have the front five doing it simultaneously as the back five, just all right. So it'd be my 8 and my 10 would be here, and then my wings would be here, and my target 9 would be in here, and they're trying to pass it around each other, right? So again, not opposed, but still have to be aware of what the other team is doing. So I would have them doing that. And then if I have multiple players in one position, then they just stand next to each other and they alternate, right? So the first time the ball comes through, the starting wing takes the ball, cuts it back, plays it back. And then the next time it comes to that side, then the backup wing back would take it, cut it back, play it back, right? So kind of just standing where each other are and alternating. And then in the next game, I would kind of same thing. The attacking players, so the opposition, the red circles, would be just alternating at a high level in intervals, right? Because they're going to be working the hardest. The other players can alternate, probably less frequency, just because, like I have there, the interval length would be about 8 minutes. And so maybe they're alternating with the central players quickly, and then they take their backup position as one of the outside backs or one of the center backs. I try not to sub too often in most of my systems. And then those two center mids, they're running pretty hard side to side to offer options through the gates. So their work rate's going to be a little bit higher, so they would get subs as well. So yeah, I would have subs in this one, in the second activity. And then the third activity, that's generally about, the number of kids that my roster for my U14s is pretty small. We'll only have 14 to 15-year-olds at a training session. So that's pretty reflective of what we would have in a training session.
Okay. In the F2, the development activity, if you find that the back four plus the goalkeepers are having, quite good success, maybe too much success,
right.
Do you change that activity in any way?
Oh yeah, for sure. Adding more opposition. Yeah. Yeah. So the whole point of this is kind of the same thing as the F1 activation period, is getting comfortable with ball movement, trying to make sure that passes are diagonal, not square. And so really working on technique and prepping to receive the ball. So if they're doing that at a good rate versus 2s, then let's see how they do versus 3. And then let's see how they do versus a 3 with an attacking mid, right? And then almost honestly, if we're doing really good at F2, just getting the pattern down and moving the ball around opposition, finding feet, then we can transition honestly to F3 pretty quickly, a little bit bigger numbers and more opposition.
So I'll stay with F2 for now. I've got a question about your warm-up as well. You have 2 players there right now, and so you're working with, on the attacking team, the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Who are the defensive players? So the 2 red players, are you going to put them in any type of positions? Who are those 2 players? And then do you coach them a bit?
Yeah.
Do you go like OLI, orientation, learning, implementation a bit within your sessions as well, kind of mixed methodologies?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Honestly, it's sad, right? Because it's like we almost wait for when we take a coaching course, get permission to actually do something, right? So when I first took my first coaching license, it was a D, actually in Iowa. My D license was from Iowa. And it was freeze method only, right? Like you weren't allowed to do any other coaching tool besides freeze, right? And then I had to take my C license, where they changed the methodology to where now you have to coach's toolbox. And all of a sudden it was like you were given permission to coach in a different way than just freeze, right? And it was like revelation, right? So kind of the same thing with the Federation now with OLI. Oh, hey, no, you're allowed to coach the opposition to do what you actually want them to do, right? where before we were told, no, you're not allowed to coach the opposition. You have to focus on the focus. Yeah, so for sure. So the two red players are just going to be representing, two forwards, right? So just trying to put pressure on the back. And basically the biggest thing is I'm just trying to have some live opposition so that it makes them feel a little bit under pressure to have a good touch, to have a good pass, to find feet, right? For the other players to support at diagonal angles rather than just stand square, because they can get lazy with that, right? And just that activation activity. You try and stay on them as a coach, but when there's opposition, if they pass square, they're going to pick it off and take a shot at goal, right? So trying to, they'd represent two forwards. And like I said, I would probably add, if it was getting really easy, add a third. So like three forwards in that attacking third. And then honestly, probably from there, I would probably just transition to F3 if they were doing that well with it.
Was there any intentionality to not having your 6 in your F2 activity?
Yeah. So again, the team that I'm working with is the technical level, I think, is something that we've been trying to emphasize, right? So for me, this activity is still highly technical in function. And so it's making sure that you're preparing the body properly based on where opposition is, setting yourself up at good angles, having a good pass, receiving the ball properly away from pressure. So it's more moving it side to side to find that opening to see the 6, right? So the 6 is involved, it's just they're in a gate, right? So it's, can we move the ball side to side to create that opening, that gap, to move forward to the 6?
Okay, so they're trying to get over that line. So you got your.
They're trying to find the target's feet in one of those 3 gates.
Okay.
So again, still trying to introduce this idea of, hey, we're trying to attack either in the 2 wide spaces or find a penetrating pass up the middle. But for me personally, so kind of goes to the question before, trying to involve more players, but also not trying to just pass. I don't want to reinforce a pass to a player's feet, especially in this third of the field, right? I don't want just a pass to space. So I like to, and again, I stole this from somebody, 3 gates, but 2 targets. And the targets have to move. Yeah, you're still looking for the gates. So I'm trying to train them to look in specific areas of the field to move the ball forward, but don't just hit it there aimlessly. It's got to find feet, especially in our defensive third, right? So you're looking at that area. And so, like, for example, if they look up and they see a gate, but nobody's in that gate or nobody's moving to that space, then I'm not going to pass the ball. I'm going to pull it back and try and find another space, right? I'm also trying to teach the 2 center mids, hey, we've got to move, read the game, and be there when they look up, not be there after they looked up, because now it's too late.
Okay. No, that's good. And then a quick question just about the warm-up, because, and I think Gary kind of hit on it with it being unopposed. And then you touched on giving a bit more context within your team. So it's 14 you girls, but it's your 3rd team. Would you do that activation warm-up with the ECNL team? Is there any benefit to you, maybe at a certain point of the season, on a, maybe on a Monday after a weekend? Would you maybe do that? Or would you go straight into more F2 with your higher level teams?
Yeah, I think it probably depends a little bit on what we're doing, right? If we just need to get, honestly, my biggest recovery activities are usually rondos, right? Small, not a lot of high activation of the body, but, a 3-yard, 5-yard movement side to side, right? Just repositioning yourself to play the ball, technical, things like that. For me, this is more setting up, just kind of getting the muscle memory and the mental engagement of this is how we're moving the ball, right? So you could do it as a recovery activity. I use patterns more as either preparatory or as introducing, like this training session, kind of introducing what we want to do later on in activities, just kind of laying the groundwork, right? I don't think I would build a whole session just around pattern passing necessarily, unless it's like the day before a game. So for the preparatory training session, I would do pattern passing, probably a little bit more, at least 2/3 of the field though, not just 1/3.
Okay.
Another question for me. I don't want this to be Gary takes over the Sesh, but so in the F3, you talk about coach restarts, and then can also use throw-ins and goal kicks as restarts. Could you discuss your philosophy on that between the two and the pros and cons between those two different ways of restarting?
Yeah, well, for me, one, it's game realistic, right? If we're able to get the other team to kick the ball out of bounds in our half, we have to learn how to restart the game with a throw-in on our half of the field without giving it away, right? Which is an absolute pet peeve of mine. Throw-ins become a 50-50 ball when they're your ball, right? It's same thing with goal kicks, especially now that the rule has changed with goal kicks. It's just, to me, it's just building out, right? So, especially with your players being allowed to be in the box. So initially, I would want to start with the coach playing the ball in, because I want to make sure that we're working on the areas for maybe the kids that we want to work with, right, to get this ball out, and putting them in specific situations that I'm seeing, reflecting on from our game that we want to work on. But then I just want to make it like the game. So if the ball goes out of bounds to the side, if it goes over the end line, then hey, we restart from either the goal kick or the throw-in. So just making it more game-like.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I went to a convention a couple of years ago, and Raymond Verhan, I can't pronounce his last name properly, but he was doing a similar session, and he only used one ball, and which was interesting. And he actually explained that he used the one ball because he wanted there to be a rest period within the activities. He didn't want it to be that there was like a whole bunch of balls, say, in the goal, and it was restarting from a goal kick every time. He said, because then it just becomes too rapid and almost doesn't become game-like, because if the ball goes out of bounds in a game, it does take a period of time to get it back into play. And that was resonated with me quite big. It's like, wow, a simple little adjustment like that does make a difference. So it was interesting.
Well, and something similar too, I went I think it was at the convention, but someone mentioned that same thing. They used very few balls because they wanted the players to value the ball going out of bounds, right? So the game would stop if the ball went out of bounds, because they restarted from that throw in, or they restarted from a goal kick. So they wanted if the players didn't want the game to pause, they need to keep the ball in bounds, right? They need to value the ball being in possession. So I definitely think, there's value to that.
So when you're in this activity in your environment, what's your thought on that? I mean, are you keeping a bunch of balls ready, or is that, again, maybe based on the day? And then when you do play balls from the coach, who are you playing them to? I mean, are you playing some to the red team and allowing for them, the focus team to win the ball and then build?
Yeah. So again, I think depends on how the training session's going, right? So if I really think that we're not doing a good job moving the ball and opening the other team up, probably most of those balls are going to go to either our goalkeeper or our center backs to initiate building out from that deep in our third, right? If we're starting to see some success, okay, let's give it to the other team. They have to win it back, and let's see how we transition. Really big on transition. Every activity that we would do after activation, I really want to have transitional moments, right? And so, for sure, giving it to the opposition, win it back. How can we transition into the attack? So I think for this session specifically, we're working on. It's fairly early in the season. We're still working on creating gaps in the opposition to get forward. So my primary focus will be playing the ball to probably the center backs or the one, and trying to see how we do avoiding pressure, or how we do under pressure, getting in behind them, breaking those lines to find a way to get into the attacking half. But for sure, I would play opposition. I think it just depends on the type of moments I'm looking for. If I want to focus more on transition, I'm going to play it to opposition to start with, right? If I'm focusing more on our positioning and our ability to get out, I'm probably going to play it more.
I think that's a good point. I agree with you, Jeremy, as far as stealing ideas. I think as coaches, we beg, borrow, and steal. And I was in a session with Christian Lavers, the ECNL guy, and he was talking about his game model. And he said, whenever you talk about, a phase of play, or, in this case would be building out of the back, he said, oftentimes coaches make the mistake of always starting from a position where the players are already in that position. And he said, that's not realistic. is, you know, so I
No.
think that's where it goes back to, you know, if you start the ball with the attackers and hopefully the defending, the Blues win possession, is then it teaches that transition moment to now get into your shape. And I see that a common problem a lot of times with coaches is they set it up and it's already perfect. The players don't have to work at getting into those positions.
I really think that's one of the biggest benefits I've seen coming out of the switch in the methodology of U.S. soccer courses. Just got done with a C license in Washington, and one of my candidates was this very idea, right? The other team, she identified the trend was when the other team was entering the defensive third, they won possession, they couldn't transition out well enough, right? And her initial activity was ball started with the goalkeeper in the defensive third, right? And so, and I was really happy because the other coaches in the group pointed it out to her, and she's like, they said to her, you said the problem was transitioning out after winning possession, but you're giving them possession to start with. That doesn't replicate the moment, right? So how could you do a better job replicating the moment with where the ball starts? And so she changed it to where the attacking mid started with the ball. And she fabricated it a little bit first, right? She had the attacking mid give it to the other team, but then eventually the attacking team coming into the third, the defensive team had to win it and then transition out. And that's actually the moment she wanted to be working. So it's very important, huge.
Is there some adjustments that you would make, or what adjustments could coaches make if their team was not having enough success without, obviously in this case, you can't make the field much bigger. You could take out defenders, but without doing that, we're still maintaining the time and space that they have. What could a coach do to try to give their team a bit more success within that F3 activity?
Yeah, I guess I would have to analyze, what is it that's causing the lack of success, right? The technical breakdown. So is it the player proficiency, right? So then maybe I need to take a step back and decrease the pressure because the technical proficiency of the players isn't enough. Is it the spacing, right? Maybe I could back it up a little bit. So there's a little bit more time on the ball in the actual defensive third instead of so that those 4 attacking players had more ground to cover. Instead of just the attacking half, maybe it's a 2/3 field activity if you have that luxury. So again, I think probably usually the general breakdown is the technical thing if the space is too small, right? But then if I've acknowledged that the technical proficiency is decent when they have the time and space, then maybe it's the decision, right? So then maybe that's where I would go kind of maybe a version between F2 and F3, keep the space a little bit bigger, but the numbers, maybe decrease the attacking player numbers and the defensive players and make the decision a little bit more simpler for the player, right? So instead of having 2 center mid and a defensive mid, maybe just have 1 defensive mid with 3 forwards. So that space in behind the forwards pressing is a little bit easier to find. And so maybe the decision to find that player is a little bit easier for the back line. So I'd have to evaluate kind of where the breakdown is. Is it technical? Is it the decision-making of the players on the ball? And then I think I would make an adjustment based on that.
I think also as well to add in there is sometimes I look at it is the amount of time you spend in a particular activity based upon the success. So if there are technical breakdowns, then maybe F1 becomes a little bit longer, or even F2 becomes a little bit longer. And if they're having success, then I'm going to spend a lot more time in F3, and maybe 7v4 becomes 7v5, and I'm coaching the Reds predominantly to really challenge the Blues. So I think there's different ways of looking at it.
Yeah, sure. That's a great point, Gary.
So when you get into your scrimmage, your final activity, what's your thought? I'm trying to look at your time, sir, at 25 minutes. Are you doing any coaching within that time, or do you have some belief that there's got to be some free time within the training session?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that my last activity for a majority of my sessions should be play, and it's me evaluating how I've communicated throughout the training session, right? Obviously, the biggest evaluation is game. But I think definitely letting them play for the first 5-10 minutes and just kind of seeing, am I even seeing what we worked on the entire practice, right? Are they actually doing, did I do a good job reinforcing that? So, you know, the last activity is my checking for understanding in the biggest way, which is player action, right? Did I make a difference on player action? And so definitely a key point for me is, are they moving the ball side to side to create openings to penetrate in this training session, right? Because the whole point is to get out of the defensive third to the middle and attacking third. If I might jump in and just try and, if I'm not seeing it, maybe just jump in and try and remind them, you know, and so maybe I think a tactical session like this, one really good freeze is definitely very useful. It's got to be done well, and it can't be too often, right? Because then the kids are getting annoyed with you for breaking up the game. But I think one good tactical freeze to paint, hey, what are you seeing? Why did you make that decision? Okay, did you see that space? Did you see that player, right? If it's individual breakdowns, I'm seeing the same thing with the same person, then I might go talk to that person. My players know if I come onto the field to talk to a player, the game still goes, right? They've gotten used to that. So an individual reference to a player while the game's going on, it doesn't break the game down for me because my players have gotten so used to that. So if it's a technical breakdown, then definitely addressing that player if it's happened multiple times, right? Or just coaching the flow quick. Hey, you gotta open your hips a bit better, right? Or you gotta receive the ball on the front foot. So maybe just a reminder. But yeah, it's just mostly trying to observe and see how I did and impact the player action.
So you start your reflection process within your session, like at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you do? No, that's fine. Is there anything else that you do to reflect on your sessions?
Yeah. Are the kids having fun, right? Or do they, you know, I think one of the favorite things coaches love to hear is, what, practice is over already, right? You know, that's one of our favorite things to hear. Probably means that we did a fair job of keeping them engaged and having fun. Generally, though, with these types of practice, that's not usually the case, right? Because you started off with pattern play and stuff like that. Players tend not to enjoy that as much. But, you know, I think also as the players are wrapping up, you know, once in a while, I'll just ask a random player, hey, what do you think the point of today's session? Right? And then just kind of check for understanding on, did they get what we were trying to work on based on what we were doing and the coaching points I was making, right? So, and then, you know, I'm privileged enough to have an assistant coach with my U14 girls team, which I know a lot of coaches don't, but reflecting with him on the session, you know, how he thought it went. But yeah, the biggest tell of how your training sessions is going is game, right? I'm really big on measurables during games that are related to my training session from the previous week. So from this training activity, probably a good measurable for us is, okay, how many times did we win possession and actually get out of the defensive third? That's going to be our measurable for the next game. And then we'll talk about it at halftime. We'll set a new objective for the second half, and then we'll communicate that to them after the game and to the parents as well.
That's interesting you bring up about measurable, because that was actually going to be one of my questions I was going to ask you, is kind of twofold, is how do you measure the success within your training session? Then how do you measure the success of connecting the training to the game? And that's something that I, you know, am challenged with, as far as for me, it's always been anecdotal, or it's like what I see. But sometimes even what you see is maybe not what actually happened. So I was wondering, like, different methods you use to really measure.
Yeah. So I obviously was spoiled with college because I had video of every single game, being a college coach, right? So I started getting into this whole idea of measurables as a college coach, in game film, communicating those measurables to our team, you know, after the game. To talk to them about, you know, specific objectives we had in game, tactical things that we wanted to do. And as I started trying to think about how could I apply that to club, well, at the time when I first started doing this, club soccer, I didn't have video of our game, right? unless we went to a showcase where we paid for a video of a game. But so just started trying to figure out how could I apply that same thought to the club teams I'm coaching. And honestly, it's just having my notebook and doing ticks in my notebook, right? And it's not even assistant coaches, because honestly, sometimes how they measure something is different than how I measure something, right? So, and sometimes my assistant coach can't be at the game because it's club soccer, right? And their assistant coaches either getting paid or not getting paid much money. So how can I expect them at every game helping me with measurables? So I just started doing it in my book and keeping track of games. And so I communicate this with my team, right? In preseason at our meetings, hey, this part of the season, we're working on these things, and our measurables and our objectives for every game and tournament are going to be on these things. Tell my teams the only two events that we're going to go into to win is Cup and Regional. Those are the two events that we go into to get a result, right? With this team, a little bit different because it's not a state cup team. So we said fall season, we'll develop working on the style and system that we want to play, and spring season, we're going to play into the two table, right? So our spring season coming up is going to be primarily can we get results now that we've established our game model in our system. But every game we have specific measurables, and I communicate those measurables to the parents and to the players, and then I communicate the results of those, obviously to the players at halftime and after the games, but then to the parents, they're included in that email to the players after the game with specific measurables. So like this, like I said, how many times do we win possession meaningfully, right? It's not a kick out of bounds. It's not a kick up the field. How many times do we win possession and able to get into the middle third? If it's just specifically trying to get from back third to middle third. If it's trying to create chances, how many times do we get from the middle third to the attacking third and create a chance from that, right? If it's finishing, how many times do we create chances in the final third and actually get a shot or create a good chance off of those, right? If it's winning the ball back in the attacking third, so losing possession, how many times do we actually get possession back? And it's not great, it's not specific or perfect stats, right? But I figure if I'm the one doing the stats every single time, my rate of accuracy is probably the same from game to game. So if we were 10 out of 13 in game one and we're 12 out of 16 in game two, my rate of actually paying attention and keeping ticks is probably the same from game one to game two, right? So the percentage will be relatively the same from game one to game two. So it's not perfect, but it's a good way for the players to see if they're progressing and what we say is important. For those games, when we said it's developmentally focused as opposed to trying to win this game, right?
What kind of response have you got from the players and parents as far as buying into that? Because I would imagine it helps you as far as maybe takes a little bit of the focus away from the actual result of the game, and it's more about connecting the training session to the actual game. So have you found that there's been a shift in that?
Yeah, and like I said, we lay the groundwork for this in preseason, right? So probably the teams that I see the best results are the teams that I've had for multiple years, right? So I had this kind of stat, but the last club team I had for multiple seasons, I started off with a U16 boys team and took them into U17, and we actually won our state cup and went to regionals. But yeah, I'd say that team, it got to the point where the boys would be coming off at halftime and be asking, "Hey coach, so how are we doing? Like, what are we? Did we hit our initial percentage? Do we need to readjust?" Like, they're actually coming off the field at halftime asking about the measurables, not wanting to talk specific tactics, which at some point too, you got to make that shift as well, right? Especially as you get older with kids. So with this team, the parents responded really well, especially after that preseason meeting. And after we kind of laid out specifically what are our training objectives before the season started, the parents really appreciate seeing that ahead of time. I think if you try to spring it on them in the middle of the season, hey, we're not playing these games to win. I'm trying to keep track of this stuff. The parents will be annoyed with you, right? So I think if you communicate that well at the beginning, and then you reinforce it as you go, that's where you'll see probably a lot of buy-in. You got to be consistent about it, right? You can't be wishy-washy. And the other thing is too, this is so when I was worst thing that ever happened to me. I was a 24-year-old head coach. It was my first head coaching job. The sports information director really set me up for failure because he did an article on how I was the youngest head coach in the league that year. And so we started off the season 7 games undefeated. And so I thought I was pretty hot stuff, right? Then we went on 8-game skid. And so my coaching philosophy that I'd given to the players said, winning is not important. We're playing to play this special style. We're playing to play this way, right? And the end of the year evaluations from the players was, so your philosophy says winning is not important, but during that 8-game skid, you sure got pretty pissed that we were losing 8 games in a row, right? So I've got to back it up, right? I've got to back it up. If I say that the focus of league games is development, or the focus of these games, except for state cup and regionals, is development, I got to back that up. And I can't get so worked up during games about, how we're playing. I've got to be more interested in how we're doing our measurables and our developmental objectives than how we are with the results of the game.
Yeah, that's an interesting piece. We're actually talking about some similar stuff within the club, and so it's interesting that you bring that up. So I think that's great. I got 2 questions, and I know that you maybe need to get going because you've got this thing today. 2 questions. So one of them is, you send your training sessions out to players before to let them look over them and have an idea of what it is that they're going into for the week?
No, I don't. Depending on the year, I've done that and I've not done that with my college. And I don't currently coach college right now. But it's been hit or miss with the college team. With the club teams, no, I've never done that. They know what the developmental objectives are for that month, or I send it out in emails, right? Hey, we're going to continue with this objective. So they know what our theme is currently, but I don't send them out specific training sessions.
Cool. And then would you then, so Gary talked about measurables within games. Would you ever take an activity from your training session and use that as your warm up for a game? So kind of like adding on like a 30-minute little training session before your match?
No, not really. I want game day to be consistent, right? I want it to be, I guess I want it to be something that they kind of know that, hey, this is how I get ready for a game. And I don't want to throw curveballs at them last minute. I've never really changed up pregame just for a specific developmental objective, I guess.
Okay. So, Gary, did you have anything else that you wanted to get into, or?
No, I think what I like about the Sesh is, I've viewed a number of them, is that sometimes you don't really get the context behind some of the activities, some of the things you do. I mean, like even when I kind of pointed out as far as the ball starting from the coach, or the ball can start from a natural stoppage, it may not seem important, but I think those little details do make a difference within the session. So it's always good, I think, to when you ask questions, is to get some, there is a purpose. It is deliberate at times on some of the things that we do. So I thank you, Jeremy, for sharing your session. And I know it's kind of like, as I said, nitpicking it. I think we can do that with the greats of the game. I attended Jurgen Klinsmann's session at a convention way back when, and I was like, goodness me, if I was a D license evaluator, probably wouldn't pass. Sorry, Jurgen, if you're listening.
Yeah, no, I will say that's been one of the things that so I know it's nerve-wracking, but I enjoy going to coaching licenses, getting feedback on my session and my coaching style, right? I didn't like passing or failing based on that. But as a director of a club, or, I go around, I would go around and actually evaluate guys' sessions, but I would ask people, hey, if anybody's interested in coming and watching my session, giving me feedback, I've never once had a coach take me up on that. And I don't know if it's because you're a director or what, but I think that's I don't get that very often in this role anymore, right?
Yeah.
I think it's great. I love, the amount of detail and context that you were able to give us going in today. I think that, to steal, this is usually Ross's bit at the end, but he's not here. It really does show kind of all the planning that goes into a training session. I think sometimes, a lot of coaches just go pen to paper straight away, and there's so much more you have to take into consideration before you even get there.
Right.
So, and like I said, with everyone doing game models and tactical periodizations now, the process even starts, it's an arduous process to even get to now where you're developing individual training sessions. So there's something to it.
Right.
I think that, I loved your session. I think it's really good. It's probably one that we'll look to put out on the website if we can, just see if we could get that.
Yeah, for sure.
Put it out so people can use it. But I appreciate you taking the time out. I know we said we wanted to stick to an hour, so we're at about that. Looking forward to the rest of your symposium, and hopefully we'll see you virtually at the Iowa one. I know you're bringing your staff there, so we'll keep in touch.
Bring the club staff.
All right. So that is our effort on this Friday afternoon. For all of us at Cornfed Coaching FC, we wish you well. Stay safe.